The wind didn't howl that night. It screamed. Shrill, violent, and relentless, it slammed against the decaying wood of the Whitmore ranch house like some angry god trying to break through. Snow came sideways, slashing the windows in thick, icy sheets. Every gust made the old roof groan like it might finally give way. But inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. Jack Whitmore sat in a hard-backed chair near the fireplace, his legs stretched stiffly toward the dim heat of the dying coals. The kerosene lamp on the mantel flickered, giving just enough light to show the lines etched deep across his face. 31, but the last year had aged him fast. His jaw was unshaven, his hands raw and cracked from cold and work and grief. He hadn't slept in days. Not since the sickness overtook his father's lungs. Not since his mother stopped eating. Not since the last of the calves died coughing in the barn and the water froze solid in the trough. Jack hadn't been to town in over a month. What would he even trade? The pantry was nearly empty. The bank account already empty. And the road out of Silent Ridge was buried under 3 feet of snow and bad luck. He stared into the hearth, watching the red embers pulse like dying stars. He didn't move, didn't blink, just sat. His breath came slow and fogged in front of him. Upstairs, his father's wheezing cough rattled through the walls like a loose hinge. Helen, his mother, hadn't said a word in almost 36 hours. He tried soup. She refused. He tried reading scripture. She turned her face to the wall. The mountains had always been unforgiving, but this winter they felt cruel. Jack stood up suddenly, his legs stiff, his boots dragging across the wood floor as he crossed the room. He pulled open the drawer in the old desk and yanked out a wrinkled piece of paper. The edges curled from where it had been too close to the stove last week. It was a letter. One he had written in desperation and foolishness. A letter to a mail-order bride agency out west, words spilled in a weak moment, when his loneliness had boiled over, and he'd thought maybe, just maybe, someone would answer. He never sent money with it. Hell, he wasn't even sure he meant it. But the words on the page still punched him in the chest. I don't want a wife. I want someone to remember me when I'm gone. Someone to know I tried. He dropped the paper on the desk like it burned him. The wind howled louder, rattling the tin roof. He walked to the door, yanked it open, and stared out into the storm. Snow blasted into his face, stinging like needles. The darkness swallowed everything. Trees bent under white weight. The barn, barely visible, leaned like an old drunk. And he shouted into the night. You think the mountains care? You're dying inside. They've buried better men without a whisper. His voice was swallowed whole. He slammed the door and leaned against it, breath coming faster now. His throat ached. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. He grabbed a log, one of the last 2, and fed it to the fire. Flame rose slowly. He sat again and let the warmth crawl up his legs. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to feel human for a minute. His eyes burned, not from smoke. Then knock. He sat up. Stillness. Silence. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. Not the wind, not the old wood shifting. A knock. He reached for the shotgun by the door, held it loose in one hand, and stepped cautiously forward. Another knock. Softer. Urgent. He cracked the door open against the wind. A woman stood there, half buried in snow, her coat soaked her face, ghost pale. She was young, mid-20s, maybe hair plastered to her cheeks, hands trembling. Her lips were purple, her boots falling apart at the seams. But her eyes were sharp, brown and bright, filled with something that hadn't died yet. I'm Grace Harper, she said, voice raw from the cold. I came because of your letter. Jack stared at her, stunned. What letter? She swayed. The one you wrote. I read it. I came. I know you didn't send payment, but it felt real. I needed somewhere to go. She wobbled, caught herself on the doorframe. You don't have to keep me, she added. Just let me be inside. Just for tonight. Please. Jack didn't speak. He reached forward out of instinct, catching her as her knees buckled. Her body was ice cold. He could feel the tremble run through her bones. He looked down at her. Her eyes fluttered closed. He could have turned her away. Should have, maybe. This was no place for strangers. But something inside him cracked. He shifted her weight, stepped aside, and pulled her into the house. Behind them, the storm slammed the door shut. Grace Harper didn't remember the last few steps before the door opened. Just the storm swallowing her feet, and the letter clenched in her coat pocket, nearly disintegrated from sleet. She remembered the porch light, barely glowing through the wind. Then the eyes of the man who answered the door. Cold, hard eyes that looked like they hadn't trusted anything in years. But then came the warmth. Not from the man Jack Whitmore she'd later learn, but from the fire behind him. She remembered its orange flicker as he caught her before she fell. Now she was wrapped in 2 thick blankets, sitting near that same fire, steam rising from the tin cup he placed in her hands. Her boots had been left by the door, leaking puddles onto the floor. Her socks were gone, too soaked to save. She didn't ask where the new ones came from. Maybe his mother's. Maybe his own. She didn't care. He didn't speak for a while. Just stoked the fire, stirred something on the stove, then poured her water from a kettle that hissed like it might explode. Everything he did was quiet, efficient, heavy with the kind of care you only learn by watching people die. Grace watched him from the corner of her eye. He moved like a man used to being alone. No wasted steps, no extra words. The kind of man who fixed things with his hands, but carried all his breaks on the inside. You're not from here, he said, finally, not a question. No, she whispered. Her voice cracked like glass. Kansas. He nodded like that answered 100 questions he didn't want to ask. They sat like that for a long time. Fire popping, wind wailing outside, 2 strangers watching each other through the space between a kitchen table and a dying winter storm. I didn't expect anyone to actually read that letter, Jack muttered. Didn't pay the fee. Hell, I barely finished the damn thing. Grace looked down into her cup. I wasn't looking for a husband. He glanced at her. She didn't flinch. I was looking for a way out, and I needed it to come fast. So when I read your words, I knew wherever you were, it couldn't be worse than where I'd been. He looked at her longer this time. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. She added softly, no one walks into a blizzard unless they're running from something worse. He stirred in his chair. That line's too clean to come out of Kansas. She smiled first time that night. My mother used to say it. About prairie dogs. Jack raised an eyebrow. She said, if you ever see one outside during a snowstorm, you better watch your back. Means something worse is in the den. For a second, he almost smiled. Then upstairs, the coughing started again. Deep, rattling, desperate. Grace flinched. Jack stood. My father. Excuse me. She nodded. He walked up the stairs, boots heavy on the wood. Alone, Grace let the blanket fall slightly enough to dig into her coat pocket. She pulled out what was left of the letter. The ink had run, but parts were still readable. I've got a ranch no one visits and parents too proud to admit they're dying. I don't want a woman to save me. I just want someone to know I existed when it ends. She folded it again carefully. slipped it into her boot, still drying by the fire. Jack came down 20 minutes later, his face tighter, shoulders stiffer. "She okay?" Grace asked. "She's sleeping. For now." He didn't elaborate. Just poured himself coffee, black as coal, sat across from her. "What happened in Kansas?" he asked blunt. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't know how, but because telling the truth meant saying the part she'd spent weeks trying to forget. "There was a man," she said at last, "owned land, lost his wife the year before, decided he wanted me instead." Jack didn't interrupt. "I was a seamstress. He came in with his sister one day, asked if I'd fix a coat. I said yes. 2 weeks later, he was asking my father for permission to court me. By then, my father was already gone. Just me and my little sister." Her voice dropped. "When I said no, he didn't take it well. Said girls like me don't get to choose. Told everyone I'd seduced him, then threw him out. I lost my job. Then my room. Then my sister's school wouldn't let her back in." She shook her head. "So I left. Took what little I had and got on the first train east." Jack's fingers tightened around his mug. "You don't have to believe me," she added. "I believe you," he said. Quiet, heavy. "You don't talk much," she said. "No point in wasting words on things that can't be fixed." Grace looked at the fire. "Sometimes you talk just so something inside you doesn't die." More silence. Then Jack stood and grabbed another blanket. He handed it to her. "The couch folds out. You can take the room near the stairs. I'll sleep by the fire." She opened her mouth to protest. "You walked through a damn blizzard to get here," he said. "Not unkind. You're staying the night. I'm not having your death on my hands. I appreciate it." He gave her a nod and turned toward the hearth. She hesitated at the doorway. "Jack." He looked back. "If this is the worst place I could have ended up, it still feels better than any place I've been." He held her gaze. Said nothing. She stepped into the room and shut the door softly. Jack stood still for a long time, the fire painting orange shadows across the walls. He didn't trust this. Didn't trust her. But something about her voice, her eyes, the blunt way she told the truth, cut through the cold. He threw another log on the fire. Upstairs, his father coughed again. He closed his eyes. Maybe tomorrow he'd ask Caleb about the letter. Maybe not. Maybe she'd be gone by sunrise. But part of him didn't want her to be. Part of him already knew this storm hadn't brought a stranger. It brought a reckoning. The morning came slow, like it was afraid to touch the ground. A haze of gray light filtered through the frost-covered windows, casting everything in a dull silver. The storm had moved on, but left its mark, snowdrifts piled halfway up the barn wall, ice hanging from the porch beams like crystal blades. The silence outside was heavy, but inside the house something had shifted. Grace woke in the small guest room with the scent of cedar smoke still clinging to her clothes. She'd slept harder than she expected. No nightmares, no tossing. Her body, for the first time in weeks, had let go. She sat up, her muscles sore, her shoulders stiff. Then she heard it, the low creak of footsteps, the hush of a kettle being moved, and something else, a soft humming. Not from Jack, from a woman. Old, thin, and barely audible. She pushed open the door. Jack was crouched near the fireplace, poking at the embers. His back was to her. But beside him, bundled in a worn shawl, sat Helen Whitmore. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and her eyes, though tired, were open. The humming was hers. Grace blinked. Jack turned, noticed her, and stood. She woke up about 20 minutes ago, he said quietly. Asked for tea. Helen gave a small ghost of a smile. And a slice of bread, if there's any left. Her voice rasped dry as old parchment. There is, Grace said before thinking. Then catching herself, she added, let me get it. Jack gave her a nod, stepping aside. In the kitchen, Grace moved quickly, but her hands shook. She found the bread wrapped in cloth, sliced a piece, and warmed it near the stove. She poured the tea weak but hot, and carried it back. Helen took it like a sacred gift. Thank you, dear, she whispered. You're welcome, ma'am. Jack watched all this from near the mantel, arms crossed. He said nothing, but Grace felt his eyes on her. As Helen sipped, Jack finally spoke. I didn't think she'd come back. Neither did I. Grace replied softly. But she did. The old woman finished her tea slowly. Then with great effort, she leaned back against the cushion and closed her eyes. Not asleep, but resting. Jack walked into the kitchen and stood near the table. Grace followed. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, Thank you. She shrugged. It wasn't much. He looked at her like he wanted to say something else, but the words didn't come. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat rubbing the bridge of his nose. Grace watched him. The hollowness in his face hadn't faded, not entirely. But it was different this morning. Less like defeat, more like fatigue. She poured him coffee without asking, sat across from him. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable now. Just thick, shared. After a while, she said, When was the last time she talked? He glanced toward the other room. Before the fever hit full. Maybe 5 days. And your father upstairs. Still can't breathe right. She nodded. I can look at him if you want. Jack's eyes sharpened. You a doctor now? No. But I've spent most of my life tending to sick folk. My mother was a healer back in Kansas. Learned from her and from her mother. Herbs, oils, compresses. I've seen worse than this. Jack rubbed his hands together. Maybe later. She nodded, not pushing. Then she said it. Clear, even, but not unkind. Your house is broken, Jack. But not half as broken as you are. He looked up, eyes narrowing, but there was no anger in his face. Just something startled, something raw. I'm not trying to insult you, Grace added, but everything here's cracked wide open. Your family, this land, you're carrying all of it on your back like it doesn't crush you. Jack leaned back, arms crossed tight. You've been here less than a day. I don't need a week to see what silence looks like. He didn't answer, just stared past her at the snow dripping off the edge of the roof. She let the moment sit. Then she stood and picked up her coat. I'll check the barn. Jack frowned. Why? Because I heard coughing in the night that didn't come from your father. And because, if you're still losing cattle, we need to know why. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. After a beat, he stood and grabbed his jacket. I'll go with you. They walked in silence through the knee-deep snow boots, crunching, breath pluming in front of them. The barn door creaked open like a coffin lid. Inside it was cold, but sheltered. The cows were quiet, sluggish, pressed against one another for warmth. Grace moved through them like she'd been born in a stable. Calm, gentle. She pressed a hand to one cow's neck, checked the gums, the eyes, the breath. Jack watched her, still skeptical. You've done this before. More times than I wanted to, she said. These aren't sick. Not from disease, anyway. She picked up a handful of hay from the pile in the corner, sniffed it, then frowned. "This is your feed." She dropped it. "It's moldy. Wet. That's what's making them slow. It doesn't kill them quick, but it wears them down. Gives them fever. Weakens the lungs." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I didn't notice. You've had a lot to carry. But if we don't clear this out and get them dry feed, you're going to start losing more." He stepped back as if seeing the barn for the first time. Without waiting, Grace grabbed a rake from the wall and started shoveling. "You got clean straw in the back under the tarp. Bring it. And boil some water if you can. I'll make a wash for their throats." He hesitated. "You giving orders now?" She looked up. "Do you want them to live? That did it." He disappeared into the back. They worked for hours, clearing hay, replacing bedding, making a rough tea from pine needles and salt to clean their mouths. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Jack moved slower than her, but steady, focused. And for the first time, he didn't seem quite so far away. By mid-afternoon, the cows were settled again, breathing easier, standing straighter. Jack leaned against the stall post, arms crossed, breath shallow. "You were right," he said. Grace didn't gloat. "It's not about being right. It's about surviving." He looked at her for a long time. Then, with a dry voice, said, "You always this bossy," she smiled. "Only when I have to be." They left the barn together, trudging back toward the house. The wind had died down. The sky was clearing. At the porch, Jack paused. "I was wrong to think you coming here was a mistake," he said. "I don't know what it is yet. But it's not a mistake." Grace looked at him. "I don't know what it is either. But I'm not running anymore." He gave a small nod. "Good. Because I think we'll need you." They stepped inside. And upstairs, Walter Whitmore began to cough again, only this time it wasn't the death rattle it used to be. It was deeper, stronger, still hurting but fighting. The next morning, the house smelled different. It wasn't strong or sweet, but there was a sharpness to the air, pine smoke, maybe something else. Something alive. Jack Whitmore noticed it the moment he stepped into the kitchen. For the first time in months, the place didn't feel like a tomb. Grace was already up, sleeves rolled, boiling something on the stove. A kettle hissed nearby. Her hair was tied back and her hands moved with practiced ease, chopping bark, mixing dried herbs, checking temperatures like she'd done it every day of her life. Jack leaned against the doorway. "You sleep at all a few hours," she said without turning around. "Had to keep the tea warm for your father." "How is he?" Grace poured a dark, bitter-smelling liquid into a tin cup. "Better than yesterday. His pulse is steadier. Fever's down. I think the compresses helped." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "You talk like a doctor." "I told you I'm not," she said. "But I was raised by one. My mother was the midwife for half of Kansas County. I learned fast or I got left behind." She turned, handing him the cup. "For Walter. Slow sips, it'll help loosen his chest." He took it, surprised again by how easily she moved through this house. Like she belonged. "I'll take it up," he muttered. Grace nodded. "I'll start cleaning out the barn again once the sun's up. That hay's still killing them." Jack paused, then gave her a long look. "You sure that's what it is?" She met his eyes. "Yes. But if you need to hear it plain..." She stepped closer, her voice clear and direct. "You're not cursed, Jack. You're just feeding them death and calling it fate." The words landed heavy. Not cruel, not meant to shame, just truth plain and hard as winter. Jack exhaled slowly, nodded, and disappeared up the stairs. In the barn, the sun had barely crested the ridge when Grace got to work. The hay smelled worse today, damp, sour, moldy. No wonder the animals had been weakening. She pulled up her scarf and started raking. By the time Jack joined her, she'd already filled 2 wheelbarrows. He didn't speak, just picked up a shovel and started helping. They worked side by side, sweat freezing to their brows in the cold air, hands blistering inside damp gloves. At one point, Jack stopped and leaned against the stall rail. "I thought I was just unlucky," he said. "Bad season 6 stock, maybe God was done with me." Grace didn't look up. It's easy to believe in curses when everything goes wrong. But this, it was just rot. Grace straightened, brushing hay from her coat. Sometimes the worst poison is the kind we ignore because we're too tired to look closer. They finished clearing the feed pile just before noon. Jack unrolled a new bale from the loft, clean, dry, golden, and Grace inspected it. "This is better. You should be okay, as long as you keep it covered and dry." "I will," Jack said. "From now on." Grace looked at him and saw something different, humility maybe, or gratitude. Either way, he meant it. Inside, Helen had taken to sitting up for short stretches. Lily May, the little girl who showed up begging for shelter 2 days ago, had started helping Grace prepare broths and teas. She was quick, eager, and sharper than most adults Grace had met. A good listener. A quiet hand. That afternoon, Grace checked on Walter. His breathing was ragged but improving. She laid a warm cloth on his chest and adjusted the pillows behind his back. He opened one eye. "You ain't one of them fancy doctors," he rasped. "No, sir," Grace replied. "But I'm the kind that shows up when the fancy ones don't." Walter let out something between a grunt and a chuckle. "Fair enough." He dozed again, and Grace sat quietly beside him. Downstairs, Jack came in from the barn, tracking snow on the floor. He kicked off his boots, poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window at the gray hills. Caleb showed up late that day, coat thick with frost beard iced over, carrying a sack of mail and a bottle of whiskey under his arm. "Brought what I could," he said, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Also heard your cows aren't dropping dead anymore." Jack smirked. "They're not." "That got anything to do with the woman who nearly died on your porch?" Grace entered from the hallway, wiping her hands on her apron. "That woman has a name." Caleb blinked. "I didn't mean I know," she said, offering her hand. "Grace Harper." He shook it. "Caleb Thompson. Jack and I grew up racing mules and stealing apples from Old Man Beasley's fence." Jack snorted. "He still won't look either of us in the eye." Caleb laughed, then grew more serious. "There's talk going around town about someone looking for a woman named Harper, asking around quiet-like." Grace's posture stiffened. Jack straightened too. "What kind of someone not local? Dressed too sharp, riding alone. Says he's tracking a runaway bride from Kansas." Caleb looked at Grace. "You got anyone you didn't say goodbye to properly?" Grace's face paled, but she didn't back away. "He won't find me." Caleb studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "If he shows up near here, we'll know." He stayed for supper, a thin stew made thicker by Lily's leftover cornbread. Around the table, for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a ruin. There was conversation, light laughter. Even Walter mumbled something from the couch about the stew being better than Helen's old shoe-leather soup. When night came, Grace stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Jack followed, leaning on the post beside her. The sky was clear now. Stars punched through the dark like nails through velvet. The cold bit, but not like before. This cold felt alive. "They're getting better," Grace said. "They are," Jack replied. "Thanks to you." She shook her head. "No, I just paid attention. That's more than I've done in months." She turned to him. "You've done what you could, Jack. Sometimes people fall apart before they learn how to hold things again." He looked at her, then really looked. "You ever think about staying?" For longer than just the storm, Grace's breath caught Mal. She didn't answer right away. "I've learned not to plan too far ahead." He nodded, understanding. Behind them, the door creaked open. Lily poked her head out. "Miss Grace, I think Mr. Whitmore's coughing again." Grace gave Jack a look. The elder one, she teased. "I figured." She followed Lily back inside. Jack stayed a moment longer, staring up at the stars. The ranch wasn't healed. Not yet. But it had stopped dying. And for now, that was enough. The knock came just before dawn, when the fire had burned down to its last ember, and even the wind seemed too tired to keep howling. Jack stirred from the floor near the hearth, unsure at first if the sound was part of a dream. But then it came again, soft, rapid, and too light to be anything but a child. He opened the door to a shape barely taller than the snowbank beside it. The girl couldn't have been more than 9. She wore a coat, 2 big sleeves dragging past her hands, and a mismatched pair of boots tied with twine. Her cheeks were raw from the cold. She looked up at him with eyes that didn't flinch. "My name's Lily," she said, voice hoarse. "Lily Mae Carter. I'm not here to steal. Just need someplace to be." Jack blinked, the breath knocked clean out of him by the sight. "Where's your family?" She looked past him into the house, then back at the snow behind her. "Gone." Jack hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in." She stepped inside without ceremony, shaking off snow like a stray dog. Grace appeared from the hallway in a flannel nightshirt and socks, her brow furrowed at the sight. "This is Lily," Jack said. "She just showed up." "I'm not staying," Lily said quickly. "I don't need charity. I just need a place where the snow don't talk back." Grace knelt beside her. "You hungry?" Lily nodded slow. "Then you're staying. At least long enough to eat." Later, over oatmeal thickened with bits of apple, the story came out in pieces. Her father had died that summer in a mining collapse. Her mother took sick not long after and passed in November. Since then, Lily had been moving between neighbors, some kind, some not, none permanent. When the snowstorm hit, she was in a shed behind a cobbler's house who'd locked the main door. "I walked all night," she said plainly. "Didn't know where I was going. Just kept going toward the light." Grace reached across the table and touched her hand. Lily didn't pull away. Helen, wrapped in quilts by the fire, watched all of this from the couch. She said nothing, but Jack saw the way her eyes followed Lily, not with suspicion, but with something closer to recognition. "She can stay," Helen said later when Jack carried fresh water into the room. "She already has," he replied. In the days that followed, Lily slipped into the household rhythm like she'd always been part of it. She fetched wood, stirred the soup, watched over Walter while Grace boiled herbs. She said little, but listened to everything, eyes sharp and fast. Grace noticed how the girl never left anything unfinished. Every dish dried, every blanket folded, like doing a task was safer than resting. "She's not just helping," Grace told Jack one night. "She's trying to prove she deserves to stay." "She does." "Then you should tell her that." Jack wasn't a man who gave words easily, but that evening as he passed Lily in the hallway, he paused. "You know," he said, clearing his throat, "this place runs better since you showed up." She looked up, uncertain. "You keep this up, I might have to start paying you." Lily gave the smallest of smiles, not a child's smile, but something older, wearier. That's better than most folks have offered. Outside, the snow finally began to melt, just enough for the roof to start dripping, for the road to reappear in long, wet veins through the white. And then the first visitor came, a man with a sick infant wrapped in wool. He'd heard from a friend in town that there was a woman at the Whitmore place who could work miracles with boiled pine and mustard seed. Grace took the child without hesitation. She held the baby to her chest, whispered things too soft to hear, and made a salve that cleared the child's lungs within a day. 2 days later, a woman arrived with a wound that wouldn't close. Then a boy with a fever. Then a farmer with a coughing cow. Each time Grace helped, not because she wanted to be praised, but because she couldn't watch people suffer without acting. She used what little she had, dried herbs, vinegar, honey, ash from the fireplace, and worked late into the night beside the fire. Lily stayed by her side through it all. She learned fast, measured ingredients, cleaned tools, held hands. "She's watching you," Helen told Grace one evening as Lily dozed on the rug near the hearth. "Like you're her map back to the world." Grace swallowed hard. "She doesn't need someone like me." "She needs someone who didn't give up," Helen said. "That's you." Jack came in from the barn just then, dusted with hay, arms sore from mending fence posts. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching the three of them. "This place is starting to look like a home again," he said. Grace met his eyes. Maybe it never stopped. Maybe we just did. The next morning, Jack took Lily to the ridge above the property, where the trees were thin and the wind blew clean. She stood beside him, bundled in 3 layers, staring out at the wide open land. "You ever ride a horse?" Jack asked. She shook her head. "Well," he said, "there's a pony in the barn that's mean to me, but might like you." She squinted at him. "Why would she like me? Because you're quiet, and you don't smell like sweat and frustration." That earned a real laugh. Jack smiled. "You're safe here, Lily. You don't have to earn that. You just have it." She nodded, but didn't speak. Instead, she walked to the edge of the hill, arms out like wings, face tilted toward the pale sun. Jack watched her heart tugging in a way he hadn't expected. That night, after the chores were done and the fires lit, Lily sat cross-legged by the hearth while Grace braided her hair. Jack watched them from the kitchen doorway, arms folded. "Looks like you've got a shadow," he said. Grace smiled. "More like a partner." Walter, who hadn't spoken all day, cleared his throat. "She remind you of anyone?" Grace looked over. "Who, yourself?" he said. "When you walked in this place with snow in your hair and fire in your eyes." Lily didn't look up, but Grace felt her hands tighten just slightly on her braid. Later that night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Jack found Grace on the porch, staring at the stars. "They said you were a healer," he murmured. She didn't look at him. "I'm not." "Well," he said, "you're doing a damn good impression." Grace smiled, but it was tired. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just thinking." "About Kansas?" "No," she said. "About here." Jack leaned on the railing beside her. "I don't know what any of this means yet," she said quietly, "but it feels like a beginning. It does." The wind shifted. Somewhere inside the house, Lily stirred in her sleep. Grace listened, then said softly, "She walked through a blizzard to find this place same as I did." Jack nodded. "Some things are worth the storm." She looked at him and for the first time didn't look away. The whispers started before sunrise. Caleb rode in just past dawn, dismounting before his boots hit the porch. His face was wind-chapped and set hard. Jack met him at the door. "You're early." "I'm not the only one who's been early," Caleb said, pulling off his gloves. Words spreading fast. "About what?" Caleb jerked his chin toward the house. Her. Grace. Inside, she was finishing a salve for a boy who'd come down with frostbite on 2 toes. She worked calmly, sleeves rolled, her fingers careful, even as the child whimpered. Lily stood nearby, holding the bandage roll. "What are they saying?" Jack asked, arms crossed. "That she's a witch." Jack's jaw tightened. "Because she saved people. Because she saved them with things most folks around here don't understand. She's not using prayers, Jack. She's using boiled pine needles and vinegar, and people don't like what they can't explain. She's not hurting anyone." "Don't matter," Caleb said. "Old man Pritchard said his baby only got better 'cause the devil's afraid of her. And the preacher from Echo Hollow's coming up the trail." Jack cursed under his breath. Hell. Inside, Grace had just finished tying the bandage. She touched the boy's cheek gently and said, "You're going to be fine now. But no more bare feet in the snow, you hear me?" The boy grinned shyly and nodded. His mother scooped him into her arms, thanked Grace with tears in her eyes, and left. Grace stepped onto the porch just in time to catch the tail end of Caleb's warning. She didn't flinch when she heard the word witch. Her shoulders just straightened slightly. "I suppose I should be flattered," she said. "They're talking about me instead of ignoring me." Jack looked at her. "You knew this would come. I've seen it before. My mother was called worse. Healing scares people, especially when it doesn't look like what they're used to." Caleb cleared his throat. "They're not just talking. There's a preacher, Reverend Coyle. He's been going door to door with a Bible in one hand and a bucket of fear in the other." "Is he dangerous?" Grace asked. Caleb hesitated. "He's loud. He's got sway. And folks are scared lately. Sick cattle, rough winter, a war a few states over that's put everybody on edge." Jack looked at Grace. "We can ride into town, talk to the sheriff, and say what she said. That I boiled roots wrong." Lily stepped onto the porch beside her. "They can't run her off." Grace touched the girl's shoulder. "They'll try if we don't make it clear this ranch stands for something." That night, Jack gathered the family and anyone who'd been helped in the past few weeks. The small parlor overflowed with neighbors, tired, grateful, and uncertain. They sat on crates and stools, some still bundled in coats. Grace stood by the fireplace, Jack beside her. "I'm not a witch," Grace began, voice calm. "I'm not a saint either. I'm just a woman who learned how to use what grows from the ground to ease pain. My mother taught me, and her mother before her." A woman in the crowd. Mrs. Dolan, whose husband had survived pneumonia thanks to Grace, stood up. "My Carl was dying before she touched him. Doctor said to dig the grave. She boiled water, mixed herbs, and sat with him all night. By morning, he was breathing." A murmur swept through the room. "I don't know about witchcraft," another neighbor added, "but I know my baby don't cry through the night anymore." Jack stepped forward. "This house has seen death same as yours," he said. "But since she came, it's been seeing more life than I ever thought possible." The door slammed open. A tall man in a black coat entered. He carried no lantern. His Bible was tucked tight under one arm like a weapon. "Reverend Coyle," someone whispered. Coyle scanned the room slowly. "I come in peace," he said, though his tone made the words sound more like a threat. "But peace has a price, and that price is truth." He looked directly at Grace. "You've been meddling where no woman has the right. Playing God with roots and brews. Drawing folk away from the church with false promises and folk magic." "I've made no promises," Grace said evenly. Only poultices. Coyle's voice rose. You mock holy things with clever words. Jack stepped between them. You don't speak for this house. No, Coyle sneered. But I speak for a higher order. And it sees what's happening here. A woman leading. A girl of no family working under her. Men taking orders like sheep. Lily stepped forward, eyes blazing. She saved me. The crowd turned. I didn't ask for a preacher, Lily said, chin up. I asked for food, for warmth, for someone who didn't lie or yell or hit, and she gave it. Reverend Coyle looked stunned for a moment, then cold. You're just a child. She's more than that, Grace said, stepping beside her. She's proof that we don't need to wait for someone else to bless us before we act. The crowd stirred again. Mrs. Dolan said, Let him call her what he wants. I call her the woman who saved my Carl. Another voice rose. She healed my daughter. Coyle's face darkened. And then Caleb, standing in the back, said it loud enough for all to hear. They call her the Witch of the Ridge, but I saw her bring a man back from death with nothing but hot water and willpower. The room erupted. Voices lifted. Not in chaos, but defense. Testimony. Coyle, red-faced, looked around one last time, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Silence settled for a beat. Then Lily, breath held the whole time, exhaled. You're not going anywhere, right? She asked Grace. Grace knelt beside her. Not unless I'm dragged. Jack looked at her, admiration plain in his face. Later that night, the ranch was quiet again. Stars thick overhead. Snow beginning to soften along the edges of the barn. Jack found Grace sitting on the porch, staring out into the dark. You did good, he said. They did, she replied. They stood up. He nodded. You didn't flinch. She looked at him. I've been run out before. I won't let it happen again. Good, he said, because I was just getting used to having you here. Their hands brushed on the railing. No words followed. They didn't need them. The snow finally began to melt in earnest. By early March, the wind softened and the sound of dripping water filled the spaces between chores. Boots still sank in mud and slush, but the light stretched longer each day. The land, stubborn and battered, was starting to wake up again. So was the ranch. Cattle moved easier. Chickens returned to laying. Walter took his first steps from the bed to the window without help. Helen spent more time upright, knitting scraps into squares. She swore would be a full quilt before the Lord returned or the roof caved in, whichever came first. But not all things thawed with the land. Grace still woke from dreams that left her gasping, dreams of Kansas, of boots stomping through hallways and men's voices saying things no girl should ever hear. She never said the name. Not to Jack, not to Lily, not even to herself. Jack noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the doorframe before walking into certain rooms. He never pressed. But his silence wasn't ignorance. It was readiness. The kind that waits for the storm to return. One morning, while Grace and Lily were mending fence near the north pasture, Caleb rode in hard from town, his horse frothing, his face grim. They're coming, he said before he'd even dismounted. Jack stepped out from the barn. Who two men? Out of state. One's a lawman or pretends to be. The other's dressed like money and bad news. Said they're looking for Grace Harper. Grace didn't blink. Lily, standing behind her, tensed like a string pulled taut. They say what they want, Jack asked. Said she stole something. A man's name, his promise, maybe a horse. They were vague enough to make folks lean in, then bold enough to make 'em afraid. They'll be here by morning. Jack looked at Grace. You know who it is? She nodded once. His name's Everett Pike. He's not a lawman. He's a landowner with too many friends in the wrong places. You want to leave? Caleb asked. No. Jack's voice was firm. She's not running. Caleb hesitated. You sure he's bringing trouble? Then we'll meet it standing up. That night they prepared the ranch like it was a fort. Tools were sharpened, horses readied. Grace packed nothing. Lily watched her closely. Are they going to take you? She asked quietly. Grace crouched beside her. They'll try. I don't want to go with anyone else. Grace's throat tightened. Then I won't let you. Lily nodded, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. The next morning came cold and bright. Snow glittered like broken glass across the hills. The road was quiet until it wasn't. 2 riders, one in a tan duster, thick mustache gun slung low. The other wore a dark wool coat and gloves too clean for the trail. His face was soft, but his eyes were sharp. Grace knew that gaze. Everett Pike. They didn't dismount. Pike smiled as if he'd won something. Miss Harper, he called. Been a long ride. Grace stepped out from the porch, standing just ahead of Jack. She kept her chin high, voice level. You're trespassing. I'm retrieving property. I'm not property. The man beside Pike, the supposed lawman, shifted in his saddle. You signed a contract. You were promised to this man. I was threatened by him. There's a difference. Pike's smile dropped. You left without a word. I left because I said no, and you tried to take me anyway. Behind them, Caleb emerged from the barn. Walter stood at the window, rifle across his lap. Helen watched from a rocking chair, a rosary in her hands. I came with papers, Pike said. A warrant for theft. You took a horse and a dowry. The horse was mine, bought with my own coin, and there was no dowry. Jack stepped forward. There's no law here that protects a liar from his own shame. Pike sneered. You harboring a fugitive now, Whitmore. I'm protecting someone who works harder than any man I've met. She's part of this ranch. She's a stain on your name. Jack didn't flinch. You don't get to call dirt a stain when you brought the mud yourself. The lawman shifted again. Look, I don't care about promises or hearts broken. I care about paper. The man's got a claim. And unless she can prove otherwise, she don't have to prove a damn thing. Jack interrupted. You think showing up with ink and threats makes you right? By law, maybe it does. Jack's voice rose, but it wasn't loud. Just sharp enough to draw blood. Don't matter if it's yours, you fight like it is. Pike raised his hand to his coat, slow, deliberate. But Grace moved faster. She stepped forward, pulling something from her skirt. A folded paper worn at the creases. She threw it at his horse's hooves. Bank receipt, she said. Horse bought fair. Dowry returned in full by my sister before I left. And a letter from the judge in Kansas says you came looking for me before the ink dried on your second proposal. That's not love. That's possession. Pike stared at the paper like it had betrayed him. The lawman bent, picked it up, scanned it. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, She's clear. Pike's mouth worked. She humiliated me. That ain't a crime, Jack said. If it were half, the women in Kansas would be in chains. Pike turned his horse hard. You'll regret this. No, Jack said. You will. They rode off without a word more. The trail swallowed them. Grace didn't move for a long time. Then her knees gave a little, and Jack caught her before she fell. Inside, Lily waited in the doorway, hands clenched. When Grace entered, the girl threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around her waist. "You didn't run," Lily whispered. "Neither did you," Grace said, her voice breaking. That night the house was quieter than usual. Not tense, just drained. Jack sat by the fire polishing the same tool for the 5th time. Grace came to sit beside him. "You meant what you said today," she murmured. "I meant every word. I didn't think anyone ever would." Jack didn't look at her. "I've been quiet too long, letting the land speak for me. But this is something I want to fight for." She leaned into him just slightly. "Then maybe this place is finally becoming ours." Outside, the sky stretched wide and clean. The storm had passed, but something stronger had stayed. Spring came slow and stubborn like a mule that didn't care what the calendar said. The snow gave way to slush, the slush to mud, and the mud to something that almost looked like life again. The trees along the ridge grew little fists of green. The creek cracked open, one trickle at a time. The Whitmore Ranch, once silent as a graveyard, began to breathe again. Jack stood at the edge of the field one morning, hands on his hips, surveying the fence line that still needed mending. Lily stood beside him, holding nails and trying not to look bored. She wore her coat unbuttoned, now confident the cold couldn't hurt her anymore. "You think we can fix all this before summer?" she asked. Jack looked around. "Not all of it, but enough." Lily nodded like that was a fair answer. She didn't ask for miracles anymore. Just effort. Behind them, Grace stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. Her sleeves were rolled, her braid half undone from rushing between the kitchen and sick room. Walter had another cough. Nothing serious, but enough to keep her up half the night. Jack glanced back at her and smiled. She didn't smile back, not because she was upset, but because she was focused. He liked that about her. She moved with purpose even when she was tired. By mid-afternoon, the fence was halfway done, and Lily had figured out how to hammer nails without bending them. Grace brought bread and butter wrapped in cloth, and they sat in the dirt to eat. The 3 of them. No titles, no blood. Just people doing what had to be done. Afterward, Jack walked the perimeter with Grace while Lily wandered ahead, collecting rocks she claimed were special. "She ever say what she wants to be when she grows up?" Jack asked. Grace shook her head. "No, I don't think she's ever had space to wonder." Jack watched Lily hold a stone up to the light like it held a secret. Maybe now she will. Grace was quiet a moment, then said, "You ever think about what you'd be if you weren't tied to this land?" "No." "Why not?" "Because every time I picture leaving, I see the house fall in behind me." Grace studied him. "Maybe that's just fear talking." "Maybe. Or maybe this place doesn't need to be abandoned. Maybe it needs to be lived in the right way." They stopped near the edge of the ridge, the land stretching wide and open before them. The sun hit the grass in a way that made everything golden. Grace looked out and said half to herself, "A roof ain't a home till someone waits under it." Jack turned to her. "Is that how it felt?" All those years she didn't look at him. "I never had a place where someone waited." "Not really. Not without a cost." He touched her hand lightly. "This roof, it's waiting for you now. No cost." She let that sit, then nodded. That night, Helen stitched patches into the quilt. while Lily read aloud from an old book they'd found behind the stove. Grace cooked soup with the last of the root vegetables, and Jack carved new drawer handles for the kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was something. A few days later, the preacher returned, but not the same one. This one was younger, riding a mule and carrying no Bible. His name was James Harper. He was Grace's brother. She opened the door and froze. James looked thinner than she remembered, his coat too loose, his boots worn. His eyes were familiar, though. Sharp, tired, kind. "I heard rumors," he said, "about a woman who walked into the hills and built herself a place where broken things don't stay broken." Grace said nothing. She just pulled him into a hug and held on until her knees gave. Later, over coffee, they talked. James had been in Missouri, then Arkansas, preaching to coal towns and broken camps where men worked the mines and sent half their lungs home in buckets. He'd heard the name Grace Harper spoken in Echo Hollow, and he followed it like a trail of ash and light. "Did he hurt you?" he asked finally. Grace nodded. "Tried to. Didn't get the last word, though." James looked at Jack. "You stood with her." Jack nodded. "Still am." James sat back. "Then you've got my thanks. And if ever he comes back, he won't," Grace interrupted. "But if he does, you won't be alone this time." Lily, who'd been eavesdropping from the stairwell, came down and sat beside Grace. "Is he really your brother?" she asked. "He is." Lily looked at James. "You staying?" He smiled. For a bit. And he did. For 2 weeks he helped with the fencing, told stories by the fire, and showed Lily how to carve initials into bark without killing the tree. He prayed over Walter's bed and helped Helen to the garden on the warmer days. He asked for nothing. Then one morning he saddled his mule and said, "The world's still breaking, and I'm still called to the cracks." Grace hugged him tight. Jack shook his hand. Lily whispered, "Be careful." James tipped his hat and rode off with the sun behind him. That evening, Grace stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the path James had taken. Jack stepped beside her. "You okay?" "I think so," she said. "He reminded me I came from something." "You did," Jack said. "But you've also built something." She nodded. In the distance, the first frogs of spring began to call, and inside, Lily waited by the stove for Grace to come read. The rain came uninvited. It poured for 3 days straight, turning the paths to rivers and the barn floor into a swamp. The chickens huddled together like a single feathered beast. The cattle lowed nervously at every crack of thunder, and the roof leaked just enough to remind everyone that nothing in the house was perfect. Lily caught a fever the second night. It started with a cough and turned into a fire behind her eyes. Grace didn't leave her side. Not to eat, not to sleep, not even when Jack offered to take a shift. "She knows my voice," Grace said, wiping the girl's brow with a damp cloth. "She'll rest better hearing it." Jack didn't argue. By the third night, Grace's own hands shook. Her hair was damp from the steam baths she prepared. Her voice had gone hoarse from humming lullabies that barely reached Lily's ears. "She's strong," Helen whispered as she watched from the doorway. "But even the strong ones break when no one's looking." Grace didn't respond. She just wrung out another cloth and whispered, "Not yet." Lily's fever finally broke just before dawn. One long, shuddering breath, and the girl sighed into sleep deeper than she'd had in days. Grace slumped forward in her chair, exhausted, but still watching. When Jack found her there an hour later, she was still upright, but only barely. He knelt beside her. "Come rest." "I can't." You already did it. She's out of danger now. Grace blinked like she'd forgotten what rest meant. Then after a beat, she nodded. Jack helped her to the bed in the side room, pulled the quilt up, and sat nearby while she slept the same way she had with Lily. Outside, the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. The ground drank greedily, but the soil near the west fence had already begun to slide. Jack and Caleb spent the next morning reinforcing the slope. They worked in silence mostly, except when one or the other cursed a busted plank or stubborn post. You ever seen her like that? Caleb asked at one point. Like what, worn down? I thought she didn't have it in her. Jack stabbed the spade into the mud. She doesn't get the luxury of falling apart. People lean on her too hard. Caleb nodded. Reminds me of my ma. Grew up with 5 boys and a husband who drank like the world owed him liquor. She held that house together with spit and hymns. But one day I saw her cry over a burned biscuit. That's when I knew she'd been holding everything else inside. Jack looked toward the house. I don't want that for Grace, then tell her. I don't know how. Caleb smirked. You just use words. Same as building a fence one piece at a time. Back inside, Lily was awake but weak. Grace fed her broth, slowly blowing on each spoonful like it was gold. I didn't mean to scare you, Lily whispered. You didn't, Grace lied. I dreamed I was back on the street, and my feet were stuck to the ground. I couldn't move even when I heard your voice calling. You're here now, Grace said. That's what matters. But what if it happens again? What if you're not there next time? Grace took her hand. Then you'll be strong enough to make it to me. Lily didn't reply. She just leaned into her side and let her eyes close. That night, Jack made stew with smoked pork and beans, and Grace sat at the table for the first time in days. Helen poured tea. Walter mumbled something about finally smelling food that didn't taste like boiled regret. It wasn't a celebration, but it was peace. After dinner, Grace stood on the porch while the wind ran through her braid. Jack joined her holding 2 mugs of tea. I've never seen you sleep, he said, handing her one. I do. When no one's looking. You scared me. She looked over. I scare easy when I care. I noticed. They stood in silence for a moment, the air fresh with the scent of wet wood and wild onion. I don't know how to say this right, Jack began. But you can lean too. On me. On this place. Grace didn't answer right away. Then she said, I've leaned before. Thought someone would catch me. They didn't. I'm not them. No, she agreed. You're not. He stepped closer. You held this house together when we were falling apart. She looked down. It gave me something to hold too. Jack reached out and took her hand. She let him. In the days that followed, the sun returned soft at first, then stronger. The ground dried. The animals grew restless, again a good sign. Grace tended to a new calf. Jack mended the wheelbarrow. Lily resumed her habit of hiding buttons in people's boots for luck. And life, that stubborn, fragile thing, kept going. But late one evening, as the sun bled gold across the hills, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Miss Grace Harper, care of Jack Whitmore Ranch. No return name, no town. The writing was elegant, too elegant. Grace opened it on the porch. Jack waited silently as she read. When she was done, her hand dropped to her lap. Well, he asked. She stared at the horizon. It's from a man named Collins, a lawyer. Jack frowned. What does he want? He says Everett Pike's gone. Gone dead. Caught pneumonia trying to cross the Washburn River in late March. He left instructions in case anything happened. Apparently, I'm still listed on a claim deed. Land he bought for us. Before I left. Jack watched her closely. What are you going to do? I don't know. You don't owe him anything. No, she said. But I might owe it to myself to see what's mine. He nodded slowly. Want company? She looked at him. Not yet. But maybe soon. He squeezed her hand once, then left her with the quiet. Behind her, the house waited. Not perfect, not safe from sorrow, but it waited. For her. Grace hadn't left the ridge in over 8 months. Not since the night she arrived under a broken sky covered in snow and silence. But now she stood beside the wagon Jack had hitched, packed light but deliberate. Lily tugged at her sleeve. You sure you don't want me to come? Grace crouched down to eye level. This is something I need to see through on my own. You'll hold the ranch better than I would right now. Lily tried not to pout. She failed. I'll be back before the moon's full, Grace added. You can count the days if it helps. Lily muttered, It won't. Jack stepped in. I'll make sure she eats more than cornbread and sass. That's all I ask, Grace said, smiling. Helen hugged her before she mounted up. Don't let ghosts talk too loud. They like the sound of their own lies. I'll keep them quiet, Grace promised. The ride into Kansas was long, slow, and lined with questions. Jack had offered to come twice, but she declined each time. This was a journey not just across land, but backward through a life she'd nearly buried. 3 days in, she passed the sign for Washburn County. The letters looked smaller than she remembered, like the place itself had shrunk. The lawyer's office sat in a brick building near the courthouse, sandwiched between a hat shop and a dentist. Mr. Collins greeted her with the caution of a man who had read more wills than wedding announcements. You came, he said, almost surprised. I got your letter. He motioned to a chair. Mr. Pike left you 50 acres just north of the river. A small cabin, a few outbuildings. No livestock. The deed's in your name. He never changed it. Grace folded the paper he handed her. Why Collins tilted his head. I can't say for sure. Regret, maybe. Or pride. Or both. Or guilt, Grace added flatly. He didn't argue. She rode out to the land that afternoon, a small map in hand. The terrain was rougher than she remembered. The trees leaned like they were tired of standing. The cabin stood, but only barely, the roof bowed, one shutter hanging loose. She dismounted and approached slowly, as if the place might bite. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and dust. There were papers still on the table, a pair of boots in the corner, a cracked cup beside the hearth. It looked like someone had just stepped out, not died. Grace sat in the lone chair and looked around. The silence pressed in heavy. She pulled the deed from her pocket and stared at the name written there. It was hers, and it meant nothing. That night, she lit a fire with old wood and read through the letters in the drawer. Most were receipts. A few were poems Everett had copied but never signed. One, written in a shaky hand, simply said, What you plant in the ground ain't always what grows. She folded it and tucked it into her pocket. The next morning, she walked the land. She found a fence post with her initials carved into it, GH beside EP. The wood was gray, the carving shallow, faded like a lie whispered too many times. By mid-morning, she had seen enough. She returned to town, found Collins, and signed a transfer document. You're giving it away, he asked, to the widow who owns the land next to it. Her cows have been grazing here for years. She's the one who's kept it alive. Collins looked surprised. You don't want anything, Grace shook her head. I already have what I need. Back home. She paused. No. Not just back home. Where I belong. She rode harder on the return trip as if the land itself wanted her back. By the time she reached the ridge, Lily was already on the porch, arms crossed, pretending she hadn't been waiting since noon. Took you long enough, she said. I brought you a rock from the riverbank. Lily's eyes lit up. Is it ugly? It's hideous, Grace grinned. Jack stepped outside, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked her over. You okay? I am now. He stepped closer. You leave something behind. No, she said, I left everything behind. That night, Grace stood under the stars, the ridge quiet but alive. She looked out at the ranch, the barn light glowing, the smoke curling from the chimney, the faint sound of Helen humming a hymn as she rocked. Jack came to stand beside her. Welcome home, he said. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded letter, and handed it to him. He read the line aloud. What you plant in the ground ain't always what grows. She nodded. He thought it meant something bad, like regret. What does it mean to you that sometimes you plant pain and end up with family? Sometimes you flee fear and find a future. He looked at her. And sometimes you bury yourself and come back blooming. She smiled. Exactly. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But his hand found hers, and neither of them let go. Inside, Lily had already placed the river rock on the mantel. Right beside the carving, she'd made herself a crooked heart, split, but stitched back together with twine. June came like it was apologizing for winter. The fields turned gold at the edges. Wildflowers bloomed in stubborn cracks, and the air hung thick with the smell of earth smoke and sun-warmed wood. The ridge was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Maybe ever. Lily had grown half an inch and reminded everyone about it daily. Helen's quilt was 2/3 finished, and Walter took to whistling again badly, but it filled the silences. Jack built a new chicken coop with wood from the barn's fallen rafter. Grace carved a nameplate for the front gate. It read, The Ridge. No longer Jack's. Not Grace's. Theirs. Still, a restlessness hung around Grace. Not the kind that pulled a person away, more like the kind that made them want to build, to fix, to finish what had started long before. She sat with Helen one evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills. You ever feel like you're waiting on something but you don't know what it is? Grace asked. Helen didn't look away from the horizon. Only every day since I turned 40. Grace smiled. How'd you stop waiting? Helen shrugged. Didn't. Just decided to live anyway. That night, Grace found Jack sanding the porch rail. He wasn't fixing anything, just smoothing wood that had already been smoothed. She sat beside him. Been thinking about the girl I used to be, she said. Jack kept sanding. She's still in there, somewhere. But I think she'd be surprised who I turned out to be. Jack looked over. She'd be proud. I don't know about that. I do. Grace leaned back against the post. I stayed. I noticed. She let out a breath. When you choose to stay, you rewrite the ending. Jack set down the sandpaper. Then let's make it a good one. The next morning, a letter arrived from Echo Hollow. It was from the mayor's small-town pomp disguised as neighborly concern. A traveling medicine company was coming through, selling cures and performing public healings. They'd heard about Grace. They wanted her to join them for a demonstration. Big tent, bright lights, applause. Jack read the letter out loud at dinner. When he finished, Grace didn't say a word. Lily narrowed her eyes. That's stupid. Helen agreed. You're not a trick. You're a person. Grace folded the letter and tucked it under her plate. It's tempting. Jack looked up, surprised. Why not because I want it, she said. Because there's still a piece of me that thinks I have to prove something. That survival only counts if someone claps afterward. Walter grunted. Clapping don't heal wounds. Work does. Love does. Lily stood. If you leave, I'm hiding in the wagon again. Grace smiled. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. Grace met her eyes. Promise. The next day, she wrote a letter of her own. Declined the invitation. Then she took the scrap wood from the coop and began building something new. A table. Wide enough for everyone. Strong enough to hold weight and time. Lily helped handing nails and sanding edges. What's it for? She asked. For when we finally sit down and stop rushing, Grace said. For when this place becomes not just a stopover, but a story worth telling. You mean like a family table exactly like that? Jack watched them from the porch. Every swing of Grace's hammer hit more solid than the last. A week later, a wagon rolled up the trail. It was Ruth, the widow, who now owned Everett's land. She came bearing a sack of flour and a smile full of trouble. I heard you're making tables, she said. I am, Grace replied. Want one? Want to trade, Ruth said. I got chickens too dumb to stay in one yard. You got fences that could use repair. And my boy Jeremiah needs something to learn other than how to spit into a bucket. Grace looked at Jack. You good with a helper? He nodded. Long as he doesn't chew louder than Walter. Walter shouted from the window, I heard that. They all laughed. Jeremiah arrived the next day full of questions and wild energy. He followed Lily like a shadow and asked Grace if he could learn to mix herbs. Only if you don't mix sass with it, she replied. He grinned. No promises. By mid-July, the ranch looked different. Not fancier, just fuller. New faces around the table. More shoes by the door. Jack added hooks for coats that hadn't existed months ago. One evening after supper, Jack walked Grace out to the edge of the ridge. There's something I want to show you. He led her to a spot where the land curved gently west, just above the creek. A plot of soil had been cleared, tilled, and framed with small stones. What is this, your garden? He said. You kept talking about it. I never had time. You do now. She stepped forward, her throat tight. You did this, He shrugged. Walter and Lily helped. Jeremiah tried. Helen supervised. Grace knelt and touched the soil. It's good earth. It is. She looked up at him. This is the first place I've planted something on purpose. He crouched beside her. Then let's see what grows. She smiled. Even if it's not what we expect. Especially then, back at the house, Lily was setting out forks. Helen hummed near the fire. Walter was arguing with Jeremiah over the rules of a card game that didn't seem to have any rules at all. Grace watched from the doorway. She had stayed, and everyone had changed because of it. The ridge woke slowly that morning, not because of the cold, there was none, but because no one was in a hurry anymore. Grace stepped outside barefoot. The wood was warm beneath her feet. Summer had fully come. The kind of heat that made you move slow, made you grateful for shade and cold coffee. Insects hummed. The sky stretched wide and clear. Lily was in the garden, sleeves, rolled hair tied back carefully, plucking weeds like each one had a story. Jeremiah was chasing chickens again. Helen sat in her rocker, quilting the last square of her long-promised masterpiece, while Walter pretended to nap, but was definitely eavesdropping on everyone within earshot. Jack was already out in the west field, working a new post into the fence line. His shirt was off his back tan and strong from the season. Grace watched him for a while before heading down with 2 canteens of water. "You'll burn out there," she said, handing him one. "Already am," he grinned, taking a long drink. "But it's a good burn." She sat on a stump, brushing dust off her hem. "Fence holding mostly. Caleb says we might get more cattle this fall. If we can finish the south side, we could double the stock. Then we'd need a bigger coop, more feed." He raised a brow. "You saying we?" Grace smiled. "I think I've been saying it for a while." He crouched in front of her, brushing dirt from her cheek. "Still feel like leaving?" "Not once in months." He kissed her, then soft and slow. No rush, no urgency, just truth. Back at the house, Lily had found a frog and was insisting it needed a name. Jeremiah voted for Toadward. Grace suggested Sir Croaks-a-lot. Walter grumbled that they should name it Soup. After lunch, they gathered under the tree behind the barn, the one that leaned just enough to be good for sitting under, not enough to fall. They passed around lemonade and stories. Jeremiah asked Jack. "How long you been here?" Jack stretched his legs. "Born 2 miles east. Never left, not really." Why, Jack looked at Grace. "I thought I was waiting on something. Turns out I was just growing into it." Helen nodded. "Place don't become home overnight. It takes seasons. Fights, forgiveness, roots." Lily pointed to the garden. "Like the tomatoes." "Exactly like the tomatoes," Grace said. They laughed, but it was the quiet kind, the kind that fills spaces more than it echoes. That evening, the wind turned gentle, the kind of breeze that feels like memory. Grace stood at the fence line watching the sky blush pink. Jack joined her. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, "Sometimes I think about that first night. How I didn't know if I'd survive the cold. How I didn't know if I wanted to." Jack slipped his hand into hers. "You didn't just survive. You changed everything." Grace's voice was steady. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Jack said. "You just reminded us we still could." Inside, Helen hung the quilt over the hearth. Walter whittled a horse for Lily, rough and unfinished, but made with care. Jeremiah was practicing rope knots, hoping one day to be half the ranch hand he imagined. Grace went room to room that night, not to check on things, but to feel them. The scuffed floors, the chipped plates, the coat hook Jack made, the mantel with the ugly river rock still sitting proud. Every crack and patch meant something. And that was the story, not one of escape, but one of staying, of growing roots even when the soil had once betrayed you. Later, when Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Grace sat on the porch with Jack. "You think folks like us ever get peace?" she asked. Jack looked out at the stars. "No. But we get something better." "What's that, people?" "Purpose. A porch to sit on when the day's work is done." Grace leaned into his shoulder. "I used to think peace meant silence. And now I think it sounds like kids laughing and quilts being stitched and cows complaining because we're 5 minutes late." Jack chuckled. "Then we're doing just fine." They sat there a while longer listening. The wind, the earth, the sound of belonging. And when they finally rose, hand in hand, and went inside, the door creaked like it always did, not because it was broken, but because it was real. In a world that had once turned away from them, they had built a place that turned toward.